We're going to pick up where we left off last week. If you remember, we were in Psalm 56, and the author of the Psalm, David, was on the run from Saul. So we got mostly through Psalm 56. So we're kind of at a weird place tonight where we're ending the study of one chapter, and we're going to begin the study of another psalm. So the next psalm that we'll study tonight is Psalm 3, which is very much of the same ilk of Psalm 56. So tonight, instead of half doing one psalm, half doing the next psalm, we're going to finish 56, and then we'll get the background, which is very important to understand Psalm 3. So we'll go ahead and finish Psalm 56. Anybody remember where we were from the thought process, or what was happening to David as he wrote Psalm 56? Yeah, he was being pursued, right? So just a quick refresher, this we call the Psalm of Fear and Faith. David was, we say captured by the Philistines. He was in the land of Gath, where he was on the run from Saul and was pursued heavily by that, and he was with the Philistines in fear for his life. We'll go ahead and reread Psalm 56, and then we have about 3 verses to cover. So we'll cover those 3, take a brief pause, and then hop right into Psalm 3. Be merciful to me, my God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. My adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride, many are attacking me. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? All day long they twist my words. All their schemes are for my ruin. They conspire, they lurk, they watch my step, hoping to take my life. Because of their wickedness, do not let them escape. In your anger, God, bring the nations down. Record my misery. List my tears on your scroll. Are they not in your record? Then my enemies will turn back when I call for help. By this I will know that God is for me. In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can man do to me? I am under your vows to you, my God. I will present my thank offerings to you. For you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. So we're down. We only have about 3-4 verses to cover to finish out the psalm from last week. So we'll go ahead and do that. We're down to Psalm 56:10. And again, as a refresher, David is on the run. He's fled for his life from Saul. He is somewhat captured by the Philistines in Gath. So we went through kind of the emotions of David, where he was scared, fearful, but heavily leaning on God to get him through this. And we see this in the words of the psalm of his pleas. He's on his face. You know, you can see this mighty person of David, all the things that he'd been through in life, from being the shepherd and killing the lion, killing the wolf, to killing the mighty Philistine Goliath. And now he's on the run in fear from really his best friend's dad, that he may be put down. So that's kind of where we are at in the psalm. And then where he is now, he's kind of gone through those motions, and now he's back to praising God as he finishes the psalm out. So again, to read this, in God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can man do to me? And that really made me think of Romans 8:31, right? If God is for us, who can be against us? And that's pretty much the life that David lived. David really personified Romans 8:31, well before it was written, right? But David really personified, if God is for me, who can be against me? And we see this, his outcrying here at the end of the psalm. And in 12, I am under vows to you, my God. Right? David never forgets all the things that he's done, the great accomplishments, the peaks and valleys that he's been through in his life, that God is with him. And he said, I will present my thank offering to you. And then Psalm 56, verse 13. For you have delivered me from death, right? Many times over, God has delivered David from death. Whether him being the shepherd boy in the wilderness with the sheep, or Goliath, and then many times throughout the rest of his life, this will be kind of a reoccurring theme for David. And you could also imagine, right, the next piece of this, in my feet from stumbling, right? And very true to form, David is on the run, right? We think of being on the run as many famous pursuits where you have O.J. Simpson and the Bronco being on the run. Well, David is literally on the run, on his feet through the wilderness, fleeing an attack. So having the solid footing underneath him as part of his praise is very important to him. But then he returns that. Not only is it a physical, but it's a spiritual walk, right? He doesn't prevent him from stumbling not only physically, but spiritually, that I may walk before God in the light of life. And I think I pretty much covered my own question, which is probably not a sign of great teaching, but talking about the things that David that God delivered David from throughout his life up until this point. I'll take a breath. Any comments on Psalm 56 before we hop into Psalm 3? And then last, a little bit of application from Psalm 56. The first being turn to God always. And David is such a great example of that, of no matter the things that David is going through in his life, he never forgets to reflect and turn to God for the things that he needs. And when we talked about last week, the peaks and valleys, right? Good times, bad times. Sometimes for particular personalities, it's easier to turn to God during good times versus the bad times. For other personalities, it's easier to turn to God during bad times and forget him in good times. But David is the example, as we have many others throughout the Bible, but David is such a great example of always turning to God no matter where you are in life. And we talked about the day-to-day burnout of I'm tired, I'm exhausted, life has worn me out, I'm burnt out, I need help. That ability to turning to God can help us get through those moments. And as David references throughout the psalm, right, God is always with us. He, capital He, is always with us. The next piece is prayer, and you could substitute praise here, right? Prayer and praise impacts day-to-day life, not just those monumental moments that we see throughout some of the things that David does, but everything from a day-to-day impact. God is always there with us, and the same with the peaks and the valleys. And then lastly, we discussed how Scripture and prayer keeps the devil at bay, right? If we use Scripture and prayer, as we saw David's example, we see Jesus' example many times over of using those things to have the devil flee from him. Again, I know this is a callback to last week, but does anybody have anything else that you took from 56 that we should be applying to our lives other than what we mentioned there? I know, that's a tough ask, asking you to remember back to last week.
The last phrase of verse 11, what can man do to me, reminds me of Paul saying, the worst thing you can do to me is kill me, and I'd be better off anyway. But sometimes if we think of that, that's the very worst, then it makes what we have to suffer through a little bit easier.
Yeah, and if you couldn't hear Bob referenced Paul in saying, and Paul saying, what's the worst that man could do to me is kill me, right? And I'm almost better off if you do, right? Because I end up to the ultimate goal if you do kill me. Anybody else? I know I had lunch with Uncle Tony and Aunt Beth, and I barely remember what I had for lunch. Now I'm asking you to remember what we talked about last week. I know it's a little tough, but anything else? Last call on 56 before we move to Psalm 3. All right, which is probably a good thing because there's a lot of similarities here in 3 than there's to 56. So we'll pick up some of that. So, like I mentioned, we're not, the typical dissection, talking about, some New Testament similarities in the verses and then application. We're going to save all that for next week because the backstory to Psalm 3 is so important that I wanted to spend the bulk of our time there tonight. Then we'll be able to cover, as our typical class goes, going through some New Testament references, a little bit of a verse-by-verse study, and then an application for us as New Testament Christians. But the backstory to Psalm 3 is so important, and to see where David's heart is as he wrote Psalm 3. I really want to be able to spend the time there so that we really have a full understanding of it as we go into read the words. Psalm 3, as I mentioned, this is composed by David, written by David. This is what I called the family feud psalm. There's probably some other better, more clever names, but we'll see why this is the family feud. This is his son, his third son, Absalom's revolt against David. And again, David is on the run. However, at this time, David is king. So King David, not Shepherd David, not going to be King David, but this is the king. King David is on the run from his own son. So that is found in 2 Psalm chapter 15. So that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our study tonight. But before we go there, just a little bit of a backdrop. So Absalom is the third son of David, and ironically, his name means the peace of his father. So we will find that far from being true in the naming of his son. Absalom, at this point, and we'll do a deeper dive into the back study, has just returned from exile and has been appointed a judge for David as he decides to understand that this is not enough. This is not the life for Absalom, just being a mere judge as my father the king. I want to be the king. So we'll see how his non-complacency and his lack of thanksgiving really leads to his ultimate downfall. So if you'll turn with me into 2 Samuel chapter 15, we'll do some study there. And before we hop into it, Absalom is first mentioned in the Bible in 2 Psalm 13. So we're not going to read this full thing because there's really 3 full lengthy chapters on Absalom. But to get an understanding of who he is and where he comes from, he's first mentioned as murdering his half-brother. Is really one of the first mentions of Absalom in the Bible. If you remember the story of Amnon and Tamar, Amnon is Absalom's half-brother. Tamar is his full sister. Amnon, the half-brother, ends up raping his full sister. So Absalom ends up murdering Amnon. And that's really one of the first mentions we hear from him. So he does that. He commits that murder. And then he ends up fleeing the kingdom. So he flees to a place called Geshur after the murder for fear of what may happen to him, what the repercussions of him murdering his half-brother are. Again, so you'll see why this is the family feud, because there's a whole lot going on here. After he is banished for a while, his cousin, so in 2 Samuel 14, verse 23, his cousin is Joab. So I'll read 23 to us in 24. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. So he's with his cousin, and he, after being exiled for some time, is on his way back to Jerusalem. And David said, the king said, let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, but did not see the king's face. And then going further down in 2 Samuel 14 to verse 28, and Absalom had dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. So Absalom has committed this murder. He has come back to Jerusalem with his cousin. David knows he's there, sent him to his house and said, I do not want to see him. And it's been 2 years since Absalom has been back in Jerusalem without seeing David. And then we'll hop down to 2 Samuel 14, verse 33. So Joab, again, the cousin to Absalom, went to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. So through all this, after 2 years, he finally sees his father, King David. King David forgives him for his transgressions. All is well for now in the house of David and Absalom. So that brings us to chapter 15. So you'll see, you'll really start to understand like the backdrop to this story, and then start to see the expressions and the emotions of David as he wrote Psalm 3. Any questions, anything I leave out to this point that you wanted to discuss before we get into 15? Just a fair warning, tonight might be a lot of me talking, so 2 Samuel 15. So this is Absalom, where we find him. After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such, a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king's to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." And so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put on his hand and take him and kiss him. Again, you see the take him and kiss him is something, the forgiveness, as such as Father showed him, now he is showing others through lawsuits in the kingdom. And then 2 Samuel 15, verse 6. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow for which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, 'If the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord.' And the king said to him, 'Go in peace.' So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron.' And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along instantly and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent to I knew this word was coming, and I practiced, Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city. For Gila was offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. So we find Absalom back in Jerusalem. He's gained some power and some notoriety as a judge. Found it as a more than fair or favorable judge, to the point that people came to him for punishment, and he typically forgave them. And then he gave them a similar reception that David gave him as he forgave them. So he was really becoming popular. Absalom was like the up and coming. Everybody liked him. He's a man of the people. He gained a lot of favor by being a pretty lenient judge when it came to punishment. And then he asked David, "I would like to go to Hebron," which is a little bit away from David. I would like to go there, so David allowed him to go there. And he took some men, took some spies, and the conspiracy behind the scenes starts to become. And then we'll pick up in 2 Samuel 15, verses 13. Now a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." So we start to see, okay, not only is he kind of working behind the scenes, but now he's got the people on his side. So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servants said to the king, "We are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands." Then the king went out with all of his household after him, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. And the king went out with all the other people after him and stopped at the outskirts. Then all his servants passed before him, and all the Ketherites, all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men who had followed him from Gath, passed before the king. Then the king said to Attai, the Gittite, "Why are you also going with us? Return and remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and are also in exile from your own place." So remember that conversation. "In fact, you came only yesterday. Should I make you wander up and down with us today, since I know not where? Return and take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you." But Ittai answered the king and said, As the Lord lives, as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant will be. So David said, Go and cross over. Then Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the little ones who were with him crossed over. And all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. So we'll pause there in 24. So David has caught word from an advisor, from an informant, that his son is conspiring to not only draw up a group of people, but also to take his kingdom from him by way of sword. So David has gathered his household. He left 10 concubines behind and is approached by this really a foreign missionary. Not missionary, a foreign mercenary, that's the right word. A foreign mercenary that is really a gun for hire and his men. And David is kind of leery of, and as you could imagine, right, with all this going on, the conspiracy behind him, he's like, do I really want to take this kind of gun for hire with me, who will probably, despite his oath of what he swore to me, the guy, whoever hands him the most money is whoever side this guy's on. So he's been, cast out of his own place, and he's here with David. So David has uprooted. He's taken his whole family. They are fleeing the land and have made it to the outskirts. So we'll pick up in verse 24. There was Zadok also with the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing over for the city. Then the king said to Zadok, Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am, let him do to me as he seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, Are you not a seer? Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Amaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Ibrahar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So the priests were going to take the ark of God with them. David sends it back and says, look, if God finds favor in me, he will send me back. I'll see the ark again, and I will see God in his dwelling place. So, again, David has some confidence, but he's also running again. In 30, so David went up to the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. Again, we start to see some of the emotions from David, right? He's very, almost seemingly clear, calm, and collective. Is like, okay, here's our mission, here's what we're going to do. And then as he's going up the Mount of Olives, that's when he kind of has the breakdown. So you see the leadership of David as he's assembling this group to leave with him, to protect his family, but also you begin to see the sorrow in his heart as he's going up the Mount of Olives. And he had his head covered and went barefoot. Again, the mighty king is leaving, crying, covered, and barefoot, his kingdom. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went. Then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshiped God, there was Hushai, the Architite, coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, If you go in with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I was your father's servant previously, so I will now also be your servant, then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me. And do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Indeed, they have come here with them, their 2 sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiahir's son, and them you shall send me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. that is a story of David on the run. And obviously, you'll go on and throughout the study, David does regain his kingdom, and his son perishes during that and is not able to complete the revolt against David. So as we study the backdrop, some traits of Absalom. Absalom was obviously a well-liked person. He found favor in the people. For lack of a better word, he's a great showman. So, if you read throughout the Bible, what is a common mode of transportation of David as a king? A mule, yeah. Yeah, he was often found on a mule, right? The great king rode humbly on a mule. So his son has come with 50 chariots and horses, and 200 people running in front of him. So it's a great display of power, so to speak, that his son has sent in after his father. He was very savvy politically, right? You saw him come back after his time in exile to quickly rise to become a judge and then become a favorable judge. And he really knew how to play the game, right? He really knew how to find favor in people. And it doesn't say, and this is conjecture on my part, but he probably really didn't care whether people were guilty or not. He just wanted them on his side and seek, like, okay, yeah, I'll forgive you, right? But just remember the guy who forgave you of this, that didn't, send this punishment upon you. It was me, right? So he really has a really proud, me first type of person that we see from him. He was also pretty cunning, right? He undermined David. He used his vows that he made to God to work in his favor. Right? So oftentimes we see David using the vows that he made to God as praise and worship and humility. His son uses them to like, okay, yeah, that's all good. Yeah, I made this vow to God, but really, what's in it for me? What can I take out of this? How can I benefit from the vow I made to God? And as he goes off to Hebron, uses that to assemble more people. But he was smart, right? And that's my last bullet point. He was smart in the ways of the world, but not wise in the ways of God's kingdom. And that ultimately leads to his downfall. Yeah, he was a good politician, right? He was good at politicking, but he wasn't probably a good politician. Yeah. Any other comments on Absalom before we flip over to David's side? Tonight's not very interactive. Tonight's a lot of me talking, so I apologize. So the David side. So David obviously learns of the rebellion. He flees. His beloved son, right? So you can think of Absalom as almost as like a prodigal son at this point, who has committed this murder, right? Probably a just murder, but he's committed a murder, is banished, has come back. David has quickly appointed him to being a judge after not seeing him for 2 years. So again, he lets him kind of stew at his house for a couple of years. But I'm sure it was probably nice dwellings, being the son of the king. So he has to stew there for 2 years. He sees him. He quickly appoints him a judge. He rises up the ranks in forgiving people quickly. And now he's turned on David. As a father, that has to be heartbreaking. To the son, he's given a lot, right? Probably if he committed the murder, again, conjecture on my part, not knowing the exact laws of the time, but I'm guessing, committing the murder, regardless of the cause, there was probably some eye for an eye, some just punishment probably headed his way, and he is, except he's exiled instead of just whatever quick punishment was probably justly coming his way because he's the king's son. He's allowed to go back into his house. He's quickly made a judge. So David has given him things over and over, yet he turned on him. That, as a father, that has to be heartbreaking. You see there's probably experiences in this room of a son or a daughter that given so much that has come to break your heart as a parent. I have good kids, but they break my heart sometimes from some of the stuff they do. And it's like, you see, my son is practically like an old teenager at 12 at this point. So everything's like the worst day of his life. Like, it's not fair. I don't understand why I have to go to bed or have to go to school. I have the worst life in the history of lives. I'm like, dude, you live in relatively nice house that's air conditioned and you never have to worry about food. Like you got a pretty good life. And but to hear that, right? Like I work hard, me and your mother work hard to provide this to you, and here you are like complaining about your life. I'm sure I was probably like that. No comments from that side of the room. But there's heartache, right? And I'm sure there's bigger cases than that in this room. But as a father looking down at a son, okay, that's heartache. But now he wants to kill me and take my kingdom. Okay, that probably goes beyond heartbreak to terrifying. So that David has seen the favor. David's smart, right? We know David's smart and wise, is a good warrior, but he chooses to flee. He gets his family out. He takes his advisor with him. He gets the people that are loyal to him, and they run for safety. And you see, David was smart. He was careful who he took with him. He sent some people back. He took some people with him. And then you'll see in reading through 16, as David passes through some of the commoners of the land, barefoot, hooded, sad, they feel sorry for him. It's probably not oftentimes in life that the king, the common man, feels sorry for, right? The guy that sits up in the high throne that looks out at the kingdom, now you find the peasants of the land feeling sorry for. That's where David is at in his life. And the question up there says, where was David's heart? And we're going to see that. So let's read Psalm 3, then we'll call it a night, and then we'll go back into the study of Psalm 3 next week. Yes, ma'am.
David, you think he could have felt guilty from, what he did with Bathsheba's husband and stuff? Back in 2 Samuel 12:11, it says, the Lord said, I will raise up evil against you from your own household. So I wonder if he could have felt, he kind of brought this on himself.
Yeah, so this is part of, and that's a good point, and I think I didn't quite get there, but that's, this is part of God's promise to David, right? From his sin against Bathsheba is your own household will rise up against you for what you've done. And this is it, right? This is Absalom rising up against him, his third son. So that's a very good point. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, Psalm 3. Again, this is a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you have struck all my enemies on their cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. A quick note, the word Salah there that we see in our Bibles, we don't have a translation for that. I looked through multiple sources. I was like, what does this mean? And maybe somebody knows it. The most common teaching or theory to what that word means is some type of musical note or something that has to do with music in the playing of the song. So I didn't say that word when I read this, but you'll see that throughout Psalms a few times, but that is the common belief of what that word is. We see the heart of David. We see where he's at. Again, very similar to Psalm 56 when he's on the run, and we see where his heart is. And this is, again, someone that he loves is after him, much like in 56. So like I said, next week we'll go through kind of a verse-by-verse dissection. We'll talk about some of the New Testament application and New Testament references. But that's it for tonight. So let's have a prayer. We'll dismiss, and then we'll see you next week. Our Father in heaven, thank you for letting us come together to study your word. We're so thankful that we have a book that can be a guidepost to our lives, that we can learn from it to study your will, that we can be better people, better Christians, and have a better walk based upon the words that are written in the Bible. Lord, we would be not only lost without the Bible,